Hi, how are you? It's time for a new writer and some new books. I started to read Oscar Wilde. To dig up a little bit about his backgrounds, Oscar Wilde was born in Ireland in 1859. He was born in a very good family. His father was a doctor and his mother was an Irish nationalist and a poet and a scholar. He had only 2 siblings, so it wasn't a large family for that time. Oscar Wilde got a very good education. He studied, for example, in Oxford. And as I understand, he wrote all his life. So he wrote poems, and he wrote to newspapers, and he wrote plays, and he wrote novels. But his life was not without trouble. He moved to London after studies and approximately 30 years old, got married and got 2 children. But apparently he was also drawn to men, and homosexuality was not well liked in those days. And one affair in particular got much attention. And for that he ended up in prison for 2 years. And he suffered the 2 years, but wrote still at the same time. But the conditions of the prisons were appalling them, so he did suffer. After getting out of the prison, he moved out of England and out of Ireland and stayed in France and Italy for the rest of his life, or rest of his years. But he died already in 1900, so he was only 46 years old. But he did manage to write quite a lot. I read first An Ideal Husband, which is a play. It's a very short play, and it's used to enhance the ability to learn English. It was a funny bit. Then I read Salome, which was originally written in French, but I do not read fluently French, so I read the English transcription. But for that I was a little bit disappointed, because I like the original version in the Bible much better. It didn't have much substance to it, even though the events that it describes are real and had a long-term effect to the world. And then I read the Picture of Dorian Grey, which is the only novel that Oscar Wilde wrote. And it didn't go very smoothly. I got very mixed feelings, because I have seen the movie that was made in, I think, 1945 or something like that, and it was very different. It was more of a like moral and horror movie, and it did leave very much out that is in the book. And then there is this like introduction in this book that some poor soul have written, and that really focuses on the idea of homosexuality and sees this book as some kind of a, I don't know, some kind of a manifest and protest for homosexuality, and sees a lot of erotic in it. And with this mixed information, I read it the first time, and I think that I was like waiting for the things to start to happen, and they never did. Not like in the movie or what was said in the introduction. And I was very disappointed. But then I thought that, okay, now I'm reading this with like false impressions and with the different kind of view. So I started again and I read it again. I do that many times, so that's not something out of the ordinary. But when I read the other time, when I read it the second time, I saw better the multiple layers in it. Of course, there is a very, very beautiful descriptions about beautiful young man and about beautiful garden and plucking leaves from the flowers and that kind of things, which is of course a little bit like if you have it for 5 pages, then you are ready to move on. But it's very like this kind of a subtle and fine description about beautiful things and about superficiality and that kind of things. And then there is the other current in the book. I'm sure that if you have heard anything about this book, I can say a few things without giving the plot away or without giving the experience away. But if you don't want to hear it, then stop now. But there is this picture that has been painted of Dorian Gray, a portrait, and he says when he looks at the portrait that that beauty in that portrait, that what if I wouldn't grow old but preserve the beauty and it would get old instead of me getting old and the picture being pretty all its existence, and that he would give his soul for it. And it's not hard to guess what happens when somebody says that I will give my soul for it or trade my soul for it. It happens. So Dorian Gray continues to live with his friends. There are 2 in particular in this book. So there is this Lord Henry, that is his friend, and then there is Basil Hallward, that is the painter of the picture. And when he does his first horrible thing, then he realizes that the picture have changed. So it's not so pretty anymore and so innocent. And then he hides the picture. And then he continues living, and the next thing happens, and the picture gets older and it gets meaner looking and it gets horrible, and at the same time this Dorian figure thinks that what he has done is awful, but nothing has changed. So it tells about a person who can do anything without consequences, and what happens if a person can do that, which is of course not possible, but if it would be. And that's the whole plot. And Dorian Gray gets worse and worse and worse and worse, and then he starts to feel paranoid and anxious and lose it bit by bit. And then the unfortunate people that see the painting, it has been turned horrible. And Dorian Gray has lived 20 years without growing old. And people start to gossip, and he starts to be meaner and meaner and meaner to people. And it's not said in blunt words, but it's just hinted that he's ruined people's lives by his reputation and by getting them into things that they shouldn't be in. And of course it's described not in detail, but told frankly that he started to use opium in the end of his life. And that's the main message from this book that I pick up. So it's not homosexual erotic descriptions. No, that's not the case. So I can't find it here. Or of course, if I have to think that it was written in 1800s, then there can't be very vivid descriptions, because it wouldn't have been published then. And Oscar Wilde could have been sentenced to prison just for writing that kind of things. So I think that if you want to pick up that kind of nuances from this book, you have to see those garden arrangements and the garden descriptions, and maybe if you are really like aware of the symbolism, you can find something. But it's not easy. Otherwise, of course, they describe like other men as beautiful, and how their skin looks, and how their nostrils are, and how their lips are, and what kind of a complexion they have, that kind of things. But that's just like vanity in my eyes. It's just like this kind of description, this kind of very sophisticated and beautiful and innocent and that kind of description. Nothing more, actually. But you have to, of course, think about it in the terms of the 1800s, and what can you write in those days and what can you not. But it was a good book, and if you are interested in this kind of literature, I certainly recommend. And like I showed you, this is an awfully small book, so it doesn't take much to read it even twice, compared to, I don't know what it was, like 200 pages, compared to those like stones that are 1,000 and 1,600 pages. And of course, it's another thing that I thought, that I try to find books from different regions. So of course I read a lot Russian literature, and it's well known in the world, and this is the one that I picked from UK, and of course there are lots of more, and then there are some writers from US that I'm starting to read. But this was from Dorian Gray and Oscar Wilde, and I have still one Oscar Wilde to read. I have the importance of being earnest, and I'll tell you how it goes when I have read it. I hope you have a great day. I see you soon. Goodbye.